Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm Assembly Minority Leader Will Barclay. And before we get started, I really want to thank the Republican Assembly Conference for their efforts during this pandemic. I would say during the pandemic, we often spoke with a strong, clear, and logical voice. And unfortunately, during this 15 months of this emergency, we haven't always heard that. And so I want to say thank you to my conference. I also want to thank Leader Ortt and the Republican Senate Conference for partnering so many times with us. I think this will be our last time we do a joint press conference during this legislative session, and they've been great partners. I just want to publicly thank them for their partnership. We're coming together today with a very simple message. It's time to end the state of emergency in the state of New York. It's time to end the state of emergency in the state of New York. To that end, we're going to introduce in both our houses, our respective houses, a concurrent resolution to end Governor Cuomo's emergency declaration and move forward with getting the state's communities and economy back on their feet. As legislator, I believe some of the most important and meaningful things we can provide by advancing this resolution are clarity and confidence. And even now, after all this time, those two items are sorely lacking. Here we are in the state capitol. Although there's a lot of us around, still closed to the public. And as you've seen over these last few days with the mask mandate, there seems to be confusion. One day you don't have to wear a mask, next day you have to wear a mask, then you don't have to wear a mask, and now you have to wear a mask. Really, does anyone really know what's going on? So that's why I think we should focus. We should focus on what we know is going on right now in New York State. The good news, the virus is in retreat. New York's 7-day positivity rate is at 0.52%. That's great news. Infection rates are among the lowest in the country and have been dropping for more than 60 consecutive days. And the other great bit of news, COVID hospitalizations are at their lowest numbers since October. And the good news with all this is that it limits our hospital and healthcare providers are no longer being threatened. So we're in a state of recovery, and we're fully capable of managing what's left of the COVID situation on our own. And now we have over a year 15 months since the executive orders and unilateral authority started. State government should acknowledge it's time to operate the way it was always intended. So again, I thank my colleagues for being here, and I want to introduce my good friend and colleague, the Senate Republican leader, Rob Ortt. Thanks.
Well, I want to thank my colleague, Leader Barclay, for your partnership, not only on this issue, but across this session. You know, it wasn't always that the Senate Republican Conference and the Assembly Republican Conference spoke with one voice. I think we have spoken with one voice, loudly, articulately, more so this session than in a very, very long time, and that's not possible with just one conference. You need leadership to make that happen. So, Leader, thank you very much for your partnership. I want to thank my colleagues as well in the Senate Republican Conference who have been through this pandemic. This has been a challenging session. We've struggled with the pandemic like everyone else have, but we've been coming here to Albany. We've been trying to make sure that our constituents, that our small businesses, that our school districts, that our single parents, that our farmers, that everyone who's been affected by this pandemic have been heard here in the halls of Albany, even though there's not everyone here to hear us. And we've continued, I think, to be a very strong voice. And you know what? I get to stand up here at the podium very often, but I have 19 other tremendous colleagues in the state Senate that I'm proud to lead. So I want to thank them as well. I'll just be brief to echo Leader Barclay's comments. What we're talking about today, this is the last week, right? This is the last week. We expect to leave this week and recess. Everyone's going to be back in their districts over the summer and into the fall. The notion that we could leave here, leaving the emergency powers in place where the governor, essentially alone, will continue to govern the state and govern the pandemic by executive order is, to me, unconscionable. That we're going to leave this in place for the foreseeable future with no end date. So what we are calling for, our resolution, would declare an end to the state of emergency, which in law would trigger the end of the governor's executive powers. And while we've been calling for this for a long time, while we've continued to call for it because our colleagues across the aisle have not done that, to be clear, they extended those powers. They removed the sunset. Just recently, I penned a letter last week on behalf of my conference on the mask mandates in school. Much to my pleasant surprise, the governor listened, and he eased those mandates. Now, maybe somebody told him that Rob Ortt wanted this after he did this, and that's why he decided to pull back. I don't know if that was why there was any confusion. But there shouldn't be any confusion. This is one person making these decisions. He's now confused internally, or him and the Commissioner of Health are not on the same page. If there's ever been an advertisement to remove these powers, it's been the last 48, 72 hours. I have received phone calls from superintendents in my district who are utterly angry, who are upset, and who are confused. And you know why they're angry and upset and confused? Because they're getting phone calls from parents who are angry and upset and confused. They're angry and upset and confused that this is even happening, that we can't get out of our own way to get this solved. A simple thing like saying, you know what, when you're outside in 90-degree heat, or outside at all, you don't have to wear masks. When you're sitting in a school that has no air conditioning and it's probably over 90 inside the classroom, you don't have to wear masks. Or if you can be 6 feet apart, you don't have to wear masks. Our teachers and our school administrators, they have been making big decisions this whole pandemic. We should be able to trust them for the safety of our children for the last couple weeks here of the school year. And yet we can't even do that. It's really, and I know today the governor said there is no confusion. Well, I have superintendents, despite the governor's attempted Jedi mind trick, I have several superintendents that would beg to differ. You have one person making decisions, and even he's confused about the confusion. So it has really just gotten to a point where, but you know what? Shame on us. Shame on our colleagues in the Senate and the Assembly, the Democrats in the Senate and the Assembly, if they leave here. We're going to approve all the governor's nominees, or we're expected to, right? He's going to appoint all these folks to different high-ranking positions, and we're going to continue to let him run the state by executive order. That is not what we were elected to do. We were elected to hold the executive accountable. We were elected to do a job by the people in New York, and as a whole, we have not been doing that. But I can tell you, the people behind me on this staircase, the Senate Republicans and the Assembly Republicans, we are prepared to do our job. We've been prepared to do our job, and we remain committed to doing that job. So thank you very much, Leader.
Great words, Leader Ortt. Thank you. And next we have Senator Borrello.
Thank you very much, Leader Ortt. I just want to say, first of all, I'm very proud to be a sponsor of this resolution in the Senate, along with my friend Phil Palmisano in the Assembly. You know, back on March 3rd of 2020, when I was just a couple of months into my new tenure as a senator from the 57th Senate District, I stood up and I spoke and I said, any legislature that would cede this much power to the executive will be reluctant to take it away. And here we are, 15 months later, and we're seeing the fallout of that reluctance. And then, to add insult to injury, back on March 5th of this year, the Senate Democrats said, we are going to repeal the governor's executive authority. What actually happened was a backroom deal with the governor, which he announced first, to rescind his authority. But instead, as the leader said, it extended it indefinitely. So where are we now? We're in a state of chaos. Our businesses don't know what the regulations are day to day. Our schools, whether it's superintendents, whether it's teachers, whether it's the students, have no idea how to interpret these things. We have a governor that has used this executive authority under this state of emergency as a political foil against his political enemies and against anyone who challenges him. He's used it as some kind of a shock and awe campaign to distract away from his legal troubles, the things that are going on in the state, the shameful fact that he is still in charge, The rest of the United States of America is open for business. And New York State is still on lockdown from a tyrannical governor, a dictator, that is handling this very much like a scene from Game of Thrones, quite frankly. He has really enforced his rules, his ultimate law, in order to keep himself in power for as long as he possibly can. So what do we have here in New York State right now? Despite the fact that myself as a business owner and every business owner that I know is looking for employees, we have the second highest unemployment rate, pretty much tied with the state of California in the continental United States at 8.2%. That means, supposedly, according to the statistics, 1 out of every 11 people in New York State is looking for a job, yet I don't know a single business owner that isn't looking for an employee. What have we done here to our economy? We've trashed it. In the meantime, we've continued to make New York less and less safe, and our governor has signed off on every single one of these ridiculous so-called criminal reform bills. In 15 months, we went from the Empire State to the state of chaos. And that's where we are in New York State. This state of emergency has to end has to end today, before we leave Albany. We need to get New York back to work, we need to get our kids back to school, and we need to reassert ourselves as a separate co-equal branch of government here in the state legislature. And that has to happen by ending this state of emergency today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we have Phil Palmisano, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano from the Southern Tier.
Thank you, Leader Barclay, Leader Ortt, Senator Borrello, my colleagues in the Senate and Assembly Republican Conference. I don't have a lot to add, but I want to reinforce. It's been 15 months. It's time. It's time we end this state of disaster emergency now, this week. We know this week the majorities of both parties both sides of the aisle of the Senate and the Assembly Democrats are pushing their end-of-session priorities. But the fact of the matter, that their priority should be to join us in finally ending this state disaster emergency. We have the power to do it, and we should do it. And talking about a disaster and emergency in the state, I think really the disaster and emergency is with the second floor, which is evidenced by the disaster this weekend with the great chaos and confusion caused by their confusion with the school mask order. Some may call it acting like they're acting as incompetence or ineptness, but one thing for sure, their actions do not instill confidence, trust, and show credibility to New Yorkers. It's typical, though, the confusing, conflicting, frustrating guidance throughout this whole situation that's been pushed on our locals and our school municipalities to be left with the fallout as they are doing today. Listen, we made tremendous progress as New Yorkers. We've masked up, we've social distanced, we put off visits with families and friends. Our infection rate's at the lowest it's ever been. Our vaccination rate's up. So therefore, it's now time to restore trust, confidence, and credibility back to the people of this state. It's now time to restore checks and balances back to our state government. It's now time to return local control and authority back to our school districts and municipalities. And if we need to act, we will act as a legislature. But it is now time to unmask our kids and get them back into school full time. It's now time to get people off unemployment and back to work, incentivize work, not unemployment. It's now time to open up our economy. And it is now time to end this state disaster emergency declaration. We call on our Democratic colleagues to join us in doing the right thing and supporting this proposal this week before we go home, because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
No truer words, Phil, no truer words. With that, does anybody have any questions for either Leader Ortt, myself, or any of the speakers?
So just to clarify, the resolution that you introduced, if it was approved, that would immediately strip the governor's emergency powers?
Yeah, we do it basically by two stages. It would take away the no longer a state of emergency. When there's no state of emergency, the governor has no emergency powers.
And what do you make of the fact that today you said once we hit 70%, everything's going to reopen? Do you take that at face value?
Well, I hope so. But, you know, you're troubled by this. We see, I think Senator Borrello said it very well. It's very difficult when someone has this power to give up that power. And there's nothing to indicate to me other than maybe some good talk that he's willing to give up that power. So that's why we think it's so critical to pass this resolution, take away the state of emergency and take that power away. Sorry, you want to say that?
No. I think the important thing to your question, though, is it's not about when he reopens things, because that's what he's deciding. It's about ending the state of emergency where he no longer is the sole arbiter of whether a business can open, or how long they can be open for, or how many people can be in there, or whether your kid, can sit in a certain spot of the school, or whether he has to wear a mask. That's what we're talking about here, is ending the state of emergency so that we are no longer operating under this notion of one person making these decisions. We, all up here, should be able to make these decisions like our founders intended.
It's been 15 months. What are we going to do? Go on 20 months? 25 months? I mean, with the infection rates as low as they are, it makes no sense to continue on with this emergency powers in the state of emergency.
I wonder if you could comment generally on the end of the session. I know we've been harping on this before, that the Capitol's still closed. I mean, it seems certainly different, not business as usual. So, how are you reacting?
Well, we think I speak for myself, and I think for the conference, we think it's unfortunate. We come from the People's House. They call it the People's House. It's a little odd that we don't actually have people at the People's House. It's time to do that. It's time to open up. And I think that, there maybe in the past there was a public health concern, but we think those times have passed, and we can still do it safely. And in order to transact government in a transparent way, you have to have the public involved.
Yeah, I think Leader Barclay and I have called for the Capitol to be opened,
Yep.
going weeks ago now, and I stand by that. Obviously, that's not going to happen while we're in session. I think we can all agree to that. But to me, it's a shame. I mean, the governor talked about reopening the state, and nowhere in these comments does he talk about reopening the Capitol. That should be troubling to people. Well, I don't care what your political stripe is. The idea that you can't come to this building and advocate and, talk to your legislators. And that is, we are doing all of this as if it was business as usual when it's not. I mean, up until recently, it looked like Fortress Albany down here. State Street was blocked off with barricades. I believe the fencing is it still up, or did they take that down? On the stairs? I mean, it doesn't even look inviting, let alone being invited in. So, I had hoped before session ended it would have been reopened to the public. That's what I think. And let me be clear, the people generally, I'll speak for myself, people coming down here a lot of times in my time here in Albany, they're not like coming down here from Rob Ortt's district, right? Most of these folks, advocacy groups, are coming down from the city. They're coming down, and very often they were coming down on issues that maybe our conferences weren't even supporting. So it's not like I'm saying, I just want my constituents to come here. I want New Yorkers, regardless of what side of the aisle or the issue they may be focusing on, they have a right to be here. This is their building. We work for them. And that certainly is not the message that I think is being put out there by having it shut down.
And maybe just add one other quick thing. It's interesting that, which we think is a good thing, that bars and restaurants can now be fully open, but somehow the Capitol is not open. I mean, now being in the Capitol, that might make you want to go to a bar sometimes, but nevertheless, it just seems like an odd paradigm going on in the state.
Okay, I'd like to know about, since the governor was talking today about 70% being the level that he wants to reach, like I guess that's the minimum for herd immunity. Are you concerned about that level being reached in order to, make any of these changes?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessary. That's, again, my thought. But, however, I would encourage everybody to get vaccinated. I think it's a good thing to do to move forward. And the more people get vaccinated, I think we'll continue to see lower infection rates as a result.
It seems the Senate's about to confirm Steve Cohen, representing Cuomo on the nursing home stuff, to the Port Authority. Is he the best person for the job?
No, he's not. He's not the best person for the job. He might be the worst person for the job, actually. I can't speak for the leader. I'll let him speak for himself and for his conference. We, in our conference, discussed this. The notion that the Senate Democrats would eagerly support Steve Cohen with everything we know about the nursing homes and the cover-up and what's been alleged regarding release of personnel records and these kinds of things. And the idea that he wouldn't appear. We confirmed him without him appearing. I think that's ridiculous, and I think the people should know not only that he is going to be confirmed, but the way in which he's going to be confirmed, which I think is a real discredit to everything we're talking about here. These people behind me are here to do their job, and we want to question people like Steve Cohen. But when he doesn't show up, and that's okay, you know, this is what you get, and we should be ashamed that he's going to be appointed to this board.
I have a similar question about Court of Appeals. The Democrats are supposedly going to confirm Madeline Singas. I'm wondering if the Republican Conference has discussed her and whether you're going to support that nomination.
For both of us?
Go ahead. It's your
Okay. Oh,
appointment.
okay. So we are currently conferencing the judicial nominees. Obviously, that's going to be tomorrow. I think, speaking for my members, the concern is more with the process, and also the idea that the governor might be appointing would-be jurors if you have an impeachment trial. But I can't yet at this point, nor would I want to speak to the individual appointees' background. I think they seem qualified. Certainly, you know, certainly Madeline Singas is a district attorney. Having a prosecutor in the court, I have to say I was surprised that the Democrats would even entertain someone that puts bad people in jail for the highest court, given their recent rhetoric and policy. But again, I think our concern in our conference is more with the process and what might await in the future, and is this the appropriate time for the governor to make these appointments, given that he might find himself in a Senate trial?
Is it possible that you'll team up with the far left people that don't like her and try to block her nomination? Is that on the table?
You know, Dan, anything's possible, I suppose, this time of year. But I don't know that that's a strategy that's, that's ongoing, but I guess we'll see over the next few hours.
This question will force you to be a broken record. That's my favorite thing. I think you know what we're going to talk about here. You just addressed it in a sense, in a loose sense, but specifically speaking, last week the governor said that he needs to hear from people about whether or not bail and discovery reform is working before he supported any changes.
Not working.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence to support the idea that anything could be done before the end of session on that?
Well, the hope is, obviously, with this huge spike we're having in violent crime, that our colleagues across the aisle wake up and see that these are bad policies. We don't make these policies in a vacuum. They have real world effects, and that's what's happening across the state. You look at New York City, crimes up, violent crimes up something like 100%. Look at Albany, look at Syracuse, look at Rochester, look at Buffalo. And I'd say, well, those are urban areas. You can even now see it seep out into less urban areas. I had a guy in Oswego County got arrested 18 times in 2 days, but had to be released because of bail reform. And this is a small city, maybe 10,000 people in the city of Oswego. So it's a real problem. I hope there's hope springs eternal. There's a realization by the Democrats that these policies really are having a very detrimental effect on public safety in New York State. And it is time we do it. But even if we don't do it this week, I think every one of us here to a person will come back any day throughout the summer to reform it. So we're going to keep the pressure on and keep talking about it as much as we can.
And Darrell, the governor, he's talked about, and the pandemic, data and science. All the data would tell you these policies are not working. Crime is on the rise in every major metropolitan city in the state, across vast swaths of the state, and they're doing things that are going to make it even worse. So, I don't know who he needs to hear from. I mean, does he need to hear from DAs, police officers, us? Does he need to hear from the victims themselves? I mean, there's plenty of people he could talk to that would tell him that the policies that he's signed are not working. And again, all I've seen introduced are policies that are going to exacerbate the public safety issue, not fix it or try to correct it.
We also have, off the top of my head, 4 other issues on the table right now. We've got clean slate, we've got elder parole, we've got timely parole, we've got less is more, which also relates to parole. Where do you all fall on those, whether pro, con, or indifferent?
Well, speaking for myself, in our conference, we just see it's a continued step in the wrong direction. It seems amazing to me while we have this spike in crime that they're talking about more soft on criminal type legislation. And maybe 1 or 2 of these in a vacuum would be okay, but looking at the totality of the situation, it just seems absolutely backwards in my mind to go forward with these types of legislation. What we ought to be doing is looking at reforming bail reform. We ought to be looking at reforming raise the age, and those types of policies are really having this huge, causing this huge spike in violent crime.
Mr. Barclay, in your report, you mentioned a little bit before about how the level of coordination between the 2 GOP conferences has been unprecedented. Could you elaborate
always talking.
And in retrospect, had this level of coordination occurred in past years, what do you think might be different today?
Well, circumstances certainly change. I don't think it's any mystery what's happened in New York State. We have Democrats controlling every branch of government. So as a result, in order to make our voices louder, I think it's imperative that we partner together. We can do press conferences like that and show that we have unity, that there is an alternative. It's not all Democratic policies, that actually Republicans, I think we introduce great ideas, but we also can point out where there's problems with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So anything we can do to get a louder voice in New York, I know myself and our conference is willing to partner with anybody as long as we can push those policies. And it's great to have this partnership going on with Leader Ortt and the Republican conference in the Senate.
A little bit more, like how do you coordinate? Do you have like a phone call?
We're in communication on a regular basis. I mean, we do talk on the phone. We meet at times. I mean, there's no set thing, but we constantly talk, and we constantly talk. I think our members are constantly in communication with one another too.
We have hundreds of people outside marching for the Health Act today. What is your conference's opinion or stance on that in response to?
Let me hit that one. You hit it. Go ahead. You hit it. I got the last one.
Yeah. I think our conference, and maybe it's just in my own mind, but I'm pretty sure we have been fairly vocal about our opposition to the New York Health Act for I guess one simple reason is that I think it would bankrupt the state of New York. There's just simply no way the state of New York could afford it. You would put a ton of people out of work. And I think you would also deprive people of health plans that they actually like and need now more than ever. So I could go on and on why I think the plan is simply untenable. I respect those folks' ability to come down here in March. And again, those would be people normally that would be able to be inside the building, and we are calling for that that should be happening. But nonetheless, our conference completely is opposed to single-payer, government-run health care here in the state of New York.
And absolutely, I agree with everything that the leader said. I mean, we have spent about $250 billion on health care in New York State. So to socialize that cost, when we have a budget that most of us think is a bloated budget at $212 billion, the math simply doesn't work. We raise, $90 billion in taxes in New York State? Someone tell me how we're going to get to $250 billion to support this. And all for what? Worse service? Government somehow going to be able to provide better health services than what's being provided now? We have some problems with our health services, but socializing it and making government in charge of it, I don't think is the answer.
Any general thoughts about next year's gubernatorial race? How important
I think we're out of time. Yeah, come on.
It is, I think everything. I'm very optimistic. I think with the one-party control, New Yorkers are starting to have enough. They start to see the effects of having one-party control, whether it's crime, whether it's the budget, whether it's reaction to the pandemic, you name it. We think the Democrats have fumbled this. So I'm very optimistic when you put our candidates, whomever that may be, up against Governor Cuomo or any other candidate, we can deliver a very good message and hopefully be successful in that election.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
That's good.